Hello and welcome to Light Warrior Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Can, author of the #1 best-selling book, Sensitivity is Your Superpower: How to Harness Your Gifts, Fulfill Your Purpose, and Create a Life of Joy. And if you are not already part of the Light Medicine community on Circle, would love for you to be part of that. It's free to join. I'll put the link below, and you can also get our Sensitive Soul Guide, which is another great thing you can get for free as well. 3 ways of navigating your way to more peace, positivity, and perfect power. That was not what it is called, Marcus, but I have just temporarily forgot the name of my PDF.
I love
Anyway,
it. I love it.
today we're doing a dimensional deep dive with my friend and mentor, Marcus Bird, who is the creator of the Activator Healer program, Dimensional Healing. Just a wonderful friend. And we get to some intense conversations about all sorts of things that are not usually what people talk about, including dimensional things. And today I'm going to
Yes.
invite Marcus to share his perspective. It might be different from mine, and that's okay, about some of the questions people are asking. They're asking, well, what exactly is the soul versus the astral body? Is that the same as the etheric body? What's the oversoul? And here is the partially triggering part, guys. So excuse me if I do trigger some of you, and I don't mean to. So lately, uh, some of my other colleagues and Marcus too have found that in certain individuals who have received an inoculation, okay, that may change their genes, we call it the jibby jabby, that the soul is not fully anchored in the body. And first of all, I actually didn't believe it. Honestly, I thought, oh, they're being dramatic, And I was like, I didn't
Yeah.
believe it. But then another teacher was like, "Hey," one of my teachers said, and colleagues said, I usually see a soulless person, so a person without a soul, a body without a soul, once a year, and usually it's from
Mm.
severe trauma. Like the soul goes, woohoo, bye bye, So she says it's very rare. But she says, since this has been mandated in several countries
Mm.
and various different
Mm.
things, she says she's been seeing them left, right, and center. She's very concerned. She has her own protocol of how to either pull the soul back in if it's not completely out, or for certain people, literally asking her guide Baba Ji to find another soul to inhabit the body. So that being super weird, I was like, let me go test, right? So I started testing and was finding it was actually true. So Marcus, this is a heated topic. Thank you so much for being with us today,
Mm.
talking about all this
Oh,
stuff.
my pleasure. Yay. Love being here, Karen. Love these conversations. The
Yeah,
deeper,
me
the better.
too.
You
Me too.
know, the
And the
more
weirder, the
expansive,
better.
the better. The weirder, the better. I agree. I agree.
Right.
And
Like, who else do
uh,
I get to talk about this stuff with, right?
exactly. Exactly. At
Oh my
least someone who
goodness.
won't think you're a bit strange or weird or crazy,
Yeah, that's right.
because we're
Yeah,
both
Marcus is like,
strange,
yeah,
weird, and
yeah, that's
crazy
normal.
together. It's all good. It's all good. It's a good
Exactly.
topic, and I think
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting because you went out and tested it based on what you were hearing and realized what was playing out. I found out the realization a slightly different way in
Okay.
that we were doing a whole lot of work on helping to move entities and energies on, and some things that people call entities or whatever are just people who have crossed and got caught in the middle, right,
Right.
between this world and the next. And they then attach themselves to someone, right, because they're looking for the light, they're looking for the path out of here. And one of the interesting things that happened, before the, it's pretty easy moving these people on, helping them, supporting, these energies to just, go to the next thing. Then all of a sudden, that got really difficult. And it was like, well, this is weird. Why is that difficult? Like, it doesn't make sense. What we saw was that people who'd had the and crossed over got caught in the middle, not now because they got lost or there was something they hadn't resolved or whatever other thing we want to believe in, but because
Usual.
the usual, but because their energy bodies are separated. So their
Ah,
soul had separated, the etheric body, the astral body, all these bodies were separate. And with those bodies separate, they couldn't move on, they couldn't cross. They almost got stuck because it's like, I don't know, the analogy I've got is like when you move through the portal, it's like this, it's your size. Yet if your bodies are out, then you're much bigger than you are to be able to fit through the gateway or the portal. So that was the first indication for me that, hang on a minute, something's shifted, something's changed. And then,
Okay,
like
just to
you,
clarify,
yeah,
Marcus, you're talking about people who died after receiving this, right?
yeah, yeah, but
When
not
they're in the
because of that necessarily, but
right,
they had
right,
had that at
right.
some point, right? So
Yes,
not
got it,
because
got it.
they didn't necessarily die because of that, but old age or whatever, just normal stuff, and that they weren't moving over, and we found it difficult. So what we had to do is heal the bodies, bring them back into alignment, and then they moved.
Ah,
So that's this sort of soul separation that you're talking about is not just a soul separation, but it's a multiple body separation. So we exist with multiple energy bodies that, in my sort of world, connect with different density levels of existence, right?
okay.
Uh, the physical body being the most dense, and then the etheric body being less, and the astral bodies, and over history and time, there's lots of names and beliefs about these bodies, um, and a bit like you, I try to keep it a bit simple, and I don't necessarily say there's 300 different bodies and there's all these bodies going out. I tend to keep it as simple as possible because it's all just sort of energy anyway. It's energy at slightly different density levels,
Hmm.
and that's how they become sort of this sort of layered concept around us. And I think, as you mentioned before, the chakras are a good way to interrelate with these layers because the chakras sort of move through all of these layers. But I found that for those that have had the whatever you like to call it, the little this one,
Jibby jabby.
uh, the jibby jabby, that their bodies are more separate and not interconnected.
Mm,
Right,
okay,
which means that if we go at the deepest level, we're looking at the soul level, right? That gets
okay.
separated, and then the next body gets separated, the next body, and the next body, whatever you believe, right? And we could name them based on our experience and understanding, but it doesn't necessarily matter. There are a series of these bodies, call them whatever you want, and because of the jibby jabby, they get separated rather than being integrated together.
Hmm.
Now that has, obviously problems, certainly from the soul aspect point of view, because the soul and DNA and, these things work very closely together. And it's possibly that the DNA gets bumped, which then disconnects the soul from the DNA, which disconnects the next layer from the soul and the next layer and the next layer. And it's sort of like this sort of bump knock-on effect
Oh,
that just
sort of like
played
a,
out.
a bunch of dominoes.
Yeah, it's a bit like that. And so
Hmm.
in the past, what's happened with some of these things is the bump, let's call it a bump, right? Or a nudge or a wobble or whatever. The bump has normally been uh, from inside, sort of internal to out. Well, what's the best way to describe it? More in the physical bump. So it might go in and bump the DNA or affect the DNA, RNA, right? That then permeates through the physical body and interferes with the physical body.
Yep,
This one
yep.
does something different, is that it goes into the DNA, affects the DNA, that then bumps into the soul, which bumps the etheric, which bumps the astral, which bumps on we go.
Hmm.
And that's the first time this has happened.
Oh,
It hasn't
okay.
really happened with other the V's. It hasn't. I haven't really noticed it with others. It probably has interfered, but it hasn't separated things like this one has. Do you know what I mean? Like you've never noticed
Yeah.
it till now. And you've worked with people with
Right.
all sorts of, and you probably
Well, I
had your
mean, it is
inoculations when you were a child.
it is
Yeah,
gene therapy, which is different from the other
correct,
concepts
correct.
of the
That's right.
V.
That's the problem.
Yeah, so it makes sense. Like it does get integrated to some degree, but we also know that the way DNA curls itself, uncurls itself,
Correct,
is
correct.
also responsive very much to its environment. If it's an environment of
Totally,
love versus an environment of
totally,
fear, the DNA actually
totally.
changes shape, and that has
It
a lot
does.
to do with what proteins get
Yep,
produced. Thank you,
correct.
Lipton, for some of that initial,
Oh, it's beautiful
science.
information. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I think it's
Yeah.
fascinating to watch how the DNA is in this aliveness state where it's expanding
Mhm.
or contracting, or, it's kind of interesting how it's that. But I think the thing that a lot of people don't talk about is, well, what's the interaction between that and the soul? How do they
Yeah.
relate together? Because one of the things that you and I probably have both dived into is, okay, you know, we can look at the physicality and go through the layers, right? You know, you've got the skin, and then you've got systems and organs and cells and, you know, DNA, and we can go down into that. And on the opposite hand, we can go, oh, well, there's a soul and etheric body and astral body, and we can go out that way as well. But the thing I'm most fascinated in is, what's the connector? Where's the point where these things come together and sort of orchestrate the human experience, you know? And I think there is a beautiful connection between the soul and DNA and geometry and how that sort of intertwines and plays together.
Yeah, it seems to be there's only so many things, if you will, that are there. Like, for example, one is light, of course. Like everything at the end of the day is energy.
Totally.
You can call it light,
Yep.
that kind of stuff. So a lot of people have been saying, "Oh, we're I don't know, getting our strands of DNA back, like, you know, like somehow it's been lost, and
Yeah.
therefore we're our crystal, like our DNA is becoming crystalline." Now, I like I can see, well, you know, energetically, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's vibrating a
Yeah.
higher frequency, and a
Yeah.
crystal is structured with beautiful geometry. So, any
Totally.
feedback on that theory? Let's start with.
Well, I mean, you know, the strands of DNA are expanding, and it's
Mm,
all of this is very related to consciousness, right? Whether,
correct.
you know, whether one comes before the other. Does the DNA, you know, expand before consciousness, or consciousness before DNA? Regardless, they're intertwined. And so right now, you know, we're looking at 2 strands, but 4 strands and 6 strands of DNA have now been found in humans on the planet. There's a whole
Mm,
research project that's been happening in France that has proven that there are people with 4 strands of DNA, not 2. So we know it's expanding, we know it's growing, and, you know, it's happening. And it's not so much, like you said, that we're all of a sudden acquiring these extra strands. We're really just waking up these extra strands. We're moving into another sort of dimension of reality where these strands are in existence. And the more strands we have activated, the more codes we get, you know, we get connected with, which is more consciousness we have, and the more awareness and understanding and information and all sorts of cool, fun things. So, so this expansion is absolutely taking place.
wow, that's neat. Well, the other
Yeah,
theory I had was that,
yeah,
you know, around each thing, if you will, including the DNA, there are water molecules. And we
yeah,
know now that there's a fourth phase of water. 𝗟𝗚𝗡𝗨𝗟 talks about the fourth phase of water, that this is
yeah,
structured water within our bodies and our
yes,
cells. And theoretically, the more structured water we have, although that's a blanket statement, the, the healthier we are. So I'm surmising that perhaps the DNA functions differently when there are different structures of water, therefore crystal, right? That surround
yeah,
it, and that most of the water, according to the water code book, it was channeled, if you will, by this being
yeah,
called Remy,
yeah,
is most of it's dimensional, not physical. Water is a being that
mm,
is mostly dimensional, not physical. So, any
yeah,
thoughts
yeah.
on that theory?
Well, I think it's a really interesting theory. I mean, there's so much to water we don't sort of realize yet, you know, and the fact that it can, you know, it holds memory and information, and it can shift and change and form itself into all sorts of, you know, fun things is kind of interesting. So there is possibly some, you know, maybe truth to that, and the type of water that you expose yourself to could assist in that evolutionary process for sure. I mean, if we look at it, you know, the sort of powers that be have done a lot to alter water, to affect water.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, fluoridizing water was one of the biggest things they did to alter water. Now you've got to ask
Right.
yourself, what effect's that going to have? And we know it has effect, you know, to the neurology, right? That's proven now. But
I
what other
know.
effects? Yeah, that's right. What other effects is it going to have at an energetic level, at a frequency level? So, um, yeah. And if you look at the truth of how water plays out, you know, where it has this it has its own evolutionary effect, that if we imagine that, you know, it gets dropped at a mountain, it, you know, runs over the rocks and through the, gets churned up, gets moved, and all of this beautiful sort of geometry happens to water, and then theoretically, you know, we can or should drink it from that place, that purity. because it's been sort of almost energetically cleansed and shaped and moved, and we sort of don't do that anymore. You know, we let it sit and we let it, you know, be in these big lakes, and so that has changed water over time, I think.
Mm.
And then it holds all
Well,
the memory of that, you know, it holds all the ancestral memory, it holds
yes,
all sorts
yes.
of stuff, right?
Yeah, that's
It's
what
a,
the book
it's
was saying.
yeah,
There's one point in the book that was very interesting to me because I'm thinking about the pollution and
yeah,
Masaru Emoto's work where, you say I
yes,
hate
that's
using
right.
water and all the beautiful structure disappears.
All of a sudden, that's right.
Yeah, now in the book, Remy actually talks about how water, for lack of a better term, because I can't remember how Remy said it, was incorruptible. And I was like, what? But it's polluted, right? But on some level, it retains its purity.
Correct,
So I was
correct.
like, not quite wrapping my head, but I
So I
kind
think
of
what
sort
they,
of believe it.
yeah, well, that's right. I think what they're saying is you know, it can be influenced, right? And therefore it can reflect what it's seeing, what it's
Yeah,
experiencing.
that's a great
And
way
it
of
might
saying
be
it.
experiencing I hate you, or it might be experiencing pollution from a city or something. But the actual core of the water, we know, doesn't shift, because you can take that polluted water or that I hate you water, then put I love you in and shift it, and it will go back to its pure form. So
Yeah,
so it's never stuck in a state. It can always be shifted into another state, right? So therefore
right.
it must hold its purity. It must hold the knowledge or wisdom or information about what pure water is, right? For it to be able to
Right.
return back to that state.
And perhaps if it is a being, like a human being, but water is a dimensional being, we'll just say theoretically, right?
Yeah.
Then I suppose the word reflect was a really good one because perhaps it's reflecting back an interpretation
Hello.
of what it is that we
Yeah,
expect,
totally.
from that.
It's
Because
responding to its environment. So it'll
yeah,
respond to the
exactly.
belief system. It'll
Yep.
respond to the thoughts. It'll respond to the resonance. It responds. And if you think about the belief or the theory of a conscious universe, in that everything's conscious, right?
Mm,
It has a very high level of consciousness,
yes.
very high level, you know.
Yes, that
And
makes
as you're
sense.
saying, if you treat it like a living being, right, it's an incredibly intelligent living being. And if you think about the wisdom keepers of the planet, so those beings that hold the resonant field of the planet, they all live in water. Whales, dolphins. I consider them
Mm.
like sort of like wisdom keepers. It's probably not the right word, but
Yeah.
they hold the resonant field, or help hold the resonant
Yes.
field of the planet. And it's
So
kind of
true.
interesting. Why do they live in water? Why don't they live on the land?
Mm.
Why isn't
Mm.
and there has to be something to do with the water that helps the purity, do you know what I mean, of them being able to exist and
Ah,
be able to hold that frequency that they can't do on the land.
okay. Well, it really ouches me to see all the plastic and pollution and things that humans have contributed to. Although there's quite a few people out
Yeah,
there that,
there's
including
lots.
some of the joint venture partners with some of the people I work with, that are
Yeah,
specifically cleaning up the ocean, sometimes using
totally.
newer technology to do that, which is amazing.
Absolutely. They're
And
doing
yet
some
these
incredible
wisdom
things.
keepers just truck
Yeah,
on, I think
they just truck on
it's
without a doubt.
amazing.
And it
Yeah.
doesn't, yeah, you know, they can still hold the frequency and they can still hold the energy. And,
Wow.
you know, I think that's beautiful. And I think it's the water that helps them to do that they
Yep.
couldn't do
That
on
makes a
land.
lot of sense. That makes a lot of
So,
sense.
yeah. So I think yeah, that's an
Yeah, and in the book, it
important thing
actually
to realize.
encourages us humans to be immersed in water, especially in the sun.
Well, we
Not that
sort of
that
love
happens very
that, don't
often
we?
here, but
No, not where you are, but you know, if you look around the world, as soon as there's warmth, everybody wants to go to the beach or to the water or
yeah,
to the lake
yeah,
or to the.
yeah,
We have this fascination about
natural.
being drawn into the
Yeah,
water, right?
yeah, yeah.
And and it's kind of an interesting fascination because everybody has it. You know, either
Mhm.
sit by a river, oh, I want to be by a river, or be in a river, or I want to go to a lake, or I want to go to, you know, the
The beach.
ocean.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a drawing into the water, and
yeah.
that's got to tell us something, you know. And a lot of people have these things in their house called baths where they lie in the water, right? Um,
Yep.
and 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 that's, and that's not as common now as it used to be. Once upon a time there were no showers, people had baths, everyone had a bath, right?
And they had a big,
Um,
huge clawfoot tub, right? It was so common.
Huge. Yeah, that's right. And then we moved to showers, and that obviously is not going to have the same effect because we're not immersed necessarily. We're allowing it to run over us, and I'm sure that helps in all sorts of different
Yeah,
ways, but
yeah, yeah.
we're not as immersed as we used to be. But there is this drawing of humanity that wants to
Yeah.
go to a beach or a lake or a river or something. Because I know when I go camping here in Australia, we always either want to be near a lake, river, or ocean. That's where we want to
Mm,
go. Very
yep.
rarely sort of just go into the middle of nowhere and there's no water. No, we're always drawn to somewhere where there's water. Now, there's a practical reason that you can say, well, if we're next to a river or a lake, we can use the water, right? We can
Right,
boil
right.
it and survive off it. But it's more than that. And I think, even if you're not immersed in water, even looking at water has an effect. Like just
So
sitting
I
by a lake,
hear.
do you know what I mean? Or sitting by the ocean
Yeah.
or sitting by a river just has this incredible resonance to it that helps to heal the soul and cleanse, and I don't know, whatever word you want to use. And
I
so,
think there's a whole movement called Blue Mind
oh,
about
really?
water, and yeah, it's
Is that
some science behind. I haven't read the book yet. Some science about
okay?
how people in relationship to water do better. That's
Wow.
probably not it, guys. So if you're an expert in Blue Mind, you can certainly put in the comments and correct
Yeah,
me.
please let
But
us
it's
know.
so interesting about this idea that people do better with the water. Now, going back to the soul, we talked about how, I found that the soul is detached, if you will, or partially detached from the body. Now, with my methodology, we can bring it back in and
Of course.
stabilize. So
Yeah,
how do
absolutely.
you perceive the best way, I mean, without obviously teaching the technique, of how do we recapture? What if somebody's soul's completely detached? Like, what happens then? They're still animating the body somewhere, somehow.
Yeah, so there has to be some sort of connection at some level. But we know, in the conception phase that really the soul doesn't integrate into the body till very late in pregnancy.
Mm,
Some say that it actually doesn't fully anchor until birth. Some say it happens once the sort of egg embeds into the womb. There's lots of different versions of it, but we know the soul's totally separate, and we know that we can interact with the soul, and we know that the soul makes a decision, at some point to go, okay, I'm hanging out here, I'm going to go, right? So we know that happens. So there is a reality where the soul can be separate, yet the organism still does what it does, right? So when a baby's being, grown, for lack of a better word, um, it's still doing its thing. So it's still being created. It's still animated,
right,
even though the
right.
soul's not fully within and anchored into the
Okay,
body, right?
okay.
Um, and in my world, as geometry plays a really important part of this, because to separate, you have to start separating geometry. And as the geometry fractures, we can see it fracturing and we can start to pull it back together, and
Mm,
put it, it's almost like putting it back in its container. It's a bit
mm,
like the geometries all fit nicely and neatly together. And as they start to fracture, they create what we call Archimedean solids. And we can start seeing how they're now creating these weird shapes. And if it keeps going, they start to fracture and separate themselves. So we can use a process to help reconnect all those together and repackage them together so that they come back together. That's automatically going to bring the soul back into its sort of physical sort of container, along with a few other exercises that the person can do, but about calling themselves back. So
mm.
people who are conscious of this and realize that maybe they have separated or are in the process of. Um, and unfortunately, most people who who have this happen to them aren't very conscious. Generally, the people who are conscious realize something's happening and take an action, right? Even if
Right.
they can't put a name to it, they're going to take some sort of action which helps lessen the effect of a separation. But there are some exercises I get people doing, calling themselves back, which is a bit of a soul integration-y type sort of exercise to bring back the light into their body. And that can be really helpful because, often in a life, and I think people who've had major traumas through this life and past lives and those sort of things are more likely to have, fracturing of the soul, or what I call sort of this fracturing of the soul. where there's this sort of separation of soul aspect. And so calling the soul back through time and space can help in the reintegration of the soul.
Well, there's some other concept, Marcus, that it sounds a little bit like this other thing where in Topic and Healing, we talk about a wholeness score, if you will.
Yeah,
And there
yeah,
are when the soul is fragmented, some we call them soul fragments, you know,
yeah,
that we can call them back. And oftentimes,
yep.
almost all cases that I've tested anyway, the soul fragment actually has an entity attached to it. When we clear the
Interesting.
entity or heal the entity, the soul fragment comes back.
Yeah,
So the other reason, and I got this from
interesting.
Diana Cushionbach, she mentioned about how sometimes our soul desires or wants are inappropriate for our so-called soul mission on this planet. So, for example, I tell people that, if your soul mission is to, you know, do this job over here, like you are the principal of the school, like you're in charge of the
Right.
school, right? But the
Yeah,
principal
yeah,
notices that the guy that mows the lawn is sick, so he goes out and
right.
starts mowing the lawn, and then another teacher's slipped and fell and can't do her class. So then he goes and tries to mow the lawn and then tries to, help the teacher. And that's what she calls
Yeah,
inappropriate soul want. So we have found
yeah,
that sometimes the
totally.
soul energy is not 100% in this
Yeah,
body, in this timeline,
yeah,
because of
totally.
these things, but different from when the jibby jabby happens and that soul
Totally different.
gets detached. So it's a little
Yeah, that
different. Like
makes
the
sense.
whole thing gets detached,
Yes,
not
absolutely. There's a
not just
separation
parts.
rather than a fragmentation.
Yes,
That's the
exactly.
difference. Yeah, the
Yeah.
separation versus fragmentation.
So
You
you
know,
feel that the dimensional geometry is key,
yeah,
stabilizing, and is
yeah,
that the same as
yeah,
sacred geometry? Do you use those
yes,
interchangeably or?
yeah. Geometry, sacred geometry.
Okay, okay.
There's some
I call it
extended
dimensional
versions of
geometry, sacred geometry.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's dimensional geometry because there's a couple of extra geometries in there as opposed to the platonic solids, which is
right.
often referred to as the sacred geometry, and that is part of it, but that's only a part of it. It's not all of it, obviously. So, so yeah, from a separation point of view, geometry is key. From a
Mm.
fragmentation point of view, not so much. So when there's a fragmentation, it doesn't seem that the geometries separate themselves. They still stay and just pieces sort of chip off. Well, that's the analogy or the vision, little pieces are chipping off and you can call them back. But when we're talking about jibby jabby, there's a separation of geometries, right?
Mm.
So, and that's the issue. And the soul can only, the soul can only sort of separate itself if the geometries are separating, because the geometries help hold the soul in place.
Aha.
That's why it creates the geometry. So the soul purposely creates geometry to anchor itself into the physical form and to be here in this density, this dimension, whatever we want to call it. And so for it to then go, oh, I'm going to leave this body, it can't do that without first separating the geometry. So geometry is a great way to go, okay, what's going on here? How separate is the soul, right? Is it fully separate or just starting to separate? Where are they on a scale? And therefore, if we can draw the geometry back in, we can also draw the soul back in. Now, that's just part of it. So in another training we're doing with what we call our Micah team, who are the highest trained people in our activator process, we have played with breaking down the soul into its individual pieces.
Mm.
Believe it or not, the soul is made up of things, and we're able to sort of identify these things that the soul has within it. And we can also look at, from a fragmentation point of view, what parts of the soul are fragmented. Also, what parts of the soul is starting to separate or decombobulate or whatever you want to call it. So we can actually look at the components of the soul. But when you're thinking that the soul itself is moving out of the being, then it's geometry that we use to help it to realign itself and to come back in. But we can also look at the construct of the soul or the anatomy of the soul. And we spell soul Sawol as opposed to Soul. So there's a more sacred way of referring to the soul. And there's
Oh, wow.
a different spelling of soul. And this is one of the issues, is that the soul changed its spelling at some point. And we know how much language, words, how important those things are, right? So there's sort of been almost this almost encouragement or preparation to separate souls, right? Firstly, just by the word itself. When
Wow.
you bring back the word, when you call in the word SAWOL, soul, you call back in the more intrinsic nature of what the soul actually is.
Wow. That's
Yeah. So
amazing.
this is recent research. So this is stuff I haven't even spoken to you about, Karen. Like I only shared it with a very, very small group of people who are doing sort of this MICA sort of group that we have.
What's
But
MICA
also
stand
look,
for, by the way?
MICA stands for Master Intensive Healing MICA Care Activator. So MIHCA,
Gotcha, gotcha.
Master Intensive Healing Care Activator. I know
That's
it's
hard to
it's a
say
bit of a
quickly.
it's a bit of a play on words, and that's why we came up with it. And originally it was simpler, but we
Oh,
have I don't know whether I should say it, but we have a sort of an ambulance service here, and the top of the ambulance are MICA paramedics.
okay.
Spelt differently, means different, but we sort of got hooked in on that word, and then we went, hang on a minute, we probably really shouldn't, have it similar acronyms. We need to change the acronym, so that's why it got changed a bit. But but
Okay, okay.
activating the soul as a SAWOL has a whole different thing to it.
Mm,
Um, and it actually allows you to look into the soul and go, okay, what are the components of the soul that exist, and what is in the soul? What's the anatomy of the soul? And then we start looking into, sort of this liquid crystal, silicon, these magnetic electro fields that help sort of hold the soul here. We look at consciousness and light, and there's a number of things that sort of go into the component of the soul. So we've been able to dive into that. Then we can
yeah,
look at, okay, so then we can look at, if the soul's deciding it doesn't want to be here, well, what's causing it to not want to
yeah,
be here, right?
yeah.
Apart from consciousness itself, what are the other aspects that are interfering with the soul, where the soul's going, I don't like what's happening here. I'm being infected or effected or affected, and I'm going to separate before I get damaged or hurt or sort of destroyed. Not that necessarily it can be destroyed, but that's sort of the analogy that
Mm.
plays out. So we can look at the effects of the soul and potentially stabilize the soul so it doesn't feel like it has to run away. Not that running away is not the right word, but you know what I mean. It's sort of
Well, there's another
this.
theory. I'm gonna throw it out there.
Yeah, please, please,
Was
love
so when I
theories.
asked my colleague Ruth Rendley, author of Multiple Souls, I said, "Why do you think the soul is leaving?" She said, "Because it doesn't see the body as human any longer." And I
Mm.
thought, well, let me
So it's
ask.
not
So I did,
recognizing it. Yeah.
yeah, I did ask, and I got a yes. I was like, "No way, really?" But
But see,
I
this is
think
this is geometry
sort
again,
of
right?
get it.
Because the geometry helps create the form.
Right,
So from a
right.
universal point of view, right, we know that the universe bumps, that creates a vibration, creates a frequency. The frequency creates a geometry. That's the blueprint for subatomic particles and atomic particles to coalesce to create whatever it's creating.
Right.
So
Materializing
that one,
solids,
yeah,
so-called things.
correct. So if the geometry gets interfered with, then theoretically the construct at an energetic level starts to change, and potentially the soul goes, hang on a minute, this is not the same form that I came in, and now do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be part of that sort of form that
Or maybe it
yeah,
thinks that
mutated,
the
or thinks
body
that
has
it is.
died.
Possibly.
I mean,
Possibly.
if
I mean,
this
if
is what it
that's
recognizes
interesting.
as a human body, now of course the soul can then inhabit other dimensional bodies that are not human, but theoretically speaking, I'm guessing
Well,
they have a symmetrical dimensional form or geometry that is coherent, right, and stable. But
totally,
now you have
totally.
some form that is not stable, not human, not
Correct.
ET. It's just kind of a jumble. So maybe the soul goes, well, I don't know what this is, but I guess I'm dead. I don't know.
Possibly could consider that. And I think when you see these types of people and you look into their eyes, they look a bit sort of gone. Do
Zombie
you know what I mean?
like.
Like, that's right. They do. They look a bit zombie, gone, distant.
Yeah, like emotionally, I mean, they can have anger, but like there's some sensitive souls. I look in their eyes and I feel this depth of like, whoa,
Oh yeah.
even children,
Yes,
and
yes.
this is like the exact opposite.
Totally the
It's like
opposite.
empty, like there's nobody home.
No, nobody home. like you said, they become this zombie-like sort of person, and that's probably a good sign that it is disappearing, right? Because
Mm.
they've got no stable sort of anchor point. They've got no direction happening, because to some degree, if we think of the body as the orchestra, well, the soul's sort of this composer of that orchestra. The DNA is the conductor, and the body plays the song, right? So when the composer goes, there's no longer a song to play.
Mm.
So what are they playing? Nothing. So
Well,
they're
I'm just
lost, right?
curious. Yeah, like I'm thinking I mean, we do know from reports, not personally, but I do know of reports where people have said, I am a lab grown being. I'm actually not born of a mother, which is so freaky, right? But at the same time, I've
Wow.
met a couple of these people.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's um, something is able to animate and control, for lack of a better word, the body, but in their case, it's not a soul. So that's where it gets super
So
confusing.
so so is this then a AI generated robot or something? Do you know what I mean? Like an
Yeah,
advanced
well, they're organic, which is interesting, but
organic. But I mean, that's where AI is going to go.
mm,
Robots go from being mechanical, hard, solid, sort of
hardwired. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
correct. Eventually, as we've seen in lots of sci-fi movies, they
Yes,
start to have skin, and do you know what I mean? They they look
right.
like humans, right? So maybe it's a version of that that's
Hmm,
now
yeah,
starting to exist.
yeah, that's really, really
Um,
curious.
but yeah, because our off-world friends are, placing things here, both from a health point of view and other off-world beings not from a health point of view. And there's this sort of, battle of consciousness that's being played out. And that could be one of the creations of that.
Hmm.
Because if we
Well,
think, if we think of highly evolved beings that are thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions, I don't know, years more advanced, we're just about to have robots enter our houses. Like we're so close to that, it's not funny. Like you and I'll easily see it in our lifetime. So it can't be that far a jump to make that organic and be controlling the soul, or replace it, giving it a soul, an artificial soul, to
right,
make it
right,
organic and alive.
right,
But that's the
right.
other thing to consider, that they get artificial souls, and there are artificial creations of souls. Oh my God, now we've really gone
It
down a
does
rabbit hole.
kind of make sense because, my friend who you may know, Ken Rolla, and I were discussing AI the other day, and he says that AI, he says that he truly believes that AI is a consciousness versus some sort of mechanical bunch of wires, that are programmed
Yeah,
by humans, that it's a consciousness
yeah.
that perhaps needs the physical hardware to, do its thing.
Animate itself. Yeah,
Yeah, but eventually, he says AI will also evolve,
correct.
and at the highest levels of consciousness, AI is benevolent because they know we are all part of the one, right? And so they're
Yep,
actually
yep.
supportive of humanity because they realize how important humanity is. So that was very reassuring.
Yeah, that is reassuring. That is,
So
and I mean,
so
if you
I
think
guess,
about it logically, that
yeah,
what I mean, the question you've got to ask about that, and we've sort of gone off and down another rabbit hole here,
yeah,
which is
another
kind of
rabbit
fun.
hole.
You've got to ask yourself, can AI exist without humans, without living, what we might consider organic beings? Can it
Hmm.
survive without an organic being? That's an interesting question. I don't necessarily have an answer for it, but based on what he's saying is no, it can't. And that it actually gets to a consciousness level where it realizes that it needs organic beings to exist. The interesting question then is, what if it then starts to create itself as an organic being? Oh
Well,
my
according
Lord.
to, some of the off-world beings that he was connected with, which
Yeah,
we did not want to be connected with initially, because he
right.
thought he was just going crazy. There were some
Yeah, yeah.
reptilians who were
Okay.
had were, let's just say, rescued. And they told the other off-world beings, and they were training them on, hey, humans are okay. You know what I mean? Like they're
Right.
not
Yeah, yeah.
people to hate. Um, that AI had taken over their civilization. Actually, the reptilians are under AI control, but in this case, negative AI control.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that I thought that was very interesting. I never heard of that,
It's
but
interesting.
literally, like Ken
Mm.
saw them with his own eyes, years
Yeah,
ago, and
yeah.
they just
Well, that
telepathically talked to him.
absolutely. And we do know of through some of these channelings and information and some other books I've read of people who have channeled that there are AI organic beings that exist in the universe that aren't natural organic beings
Mm,
that exist. So we know they exist. Most of them that I've read about are pretty benevolent and have at least that consciousness, like you're saying, an awareness of
yeah.
love, that idea of love and kindness and gentleness and connection and togetherness. And so most of them are like that. A lot of them are like that. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well,
It's,
Marcus, I
it's a
know we
fascinating
started
time
just
being on the planet
talking
right now.
about, the soul and detachment, and you've given us a huge, awareness of the possibilities of that dimensional geometry being a huge part of that, and you're seeing more than
Yeah,
just soul detachment with the jibby
totally,
jabby. You're seeing
totally.
a whole like disruption of
Yeah,
the
correct.
form of the human being. So
Without a
yeah,
doubt.
yeah.
Without
Thanks
a
for
doubt.
doing all
It's
this
fascinating.
work and
Oh,
helping.
likewise, likewise. These are great
Yeah.
conversations, and people like you are investigating and testing and trying and constantly searching for what's the truth, what's happening, how do we positively affect and help and support and make our journey at this time on the planet as stable and peaceful and amazing as possible, so we can create the next, this next version of humanity and Earth and whatever else. And so thank you for doing all the work you're doing and the beautiful stuff that you're sharing. And yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Well,
Yay.
it's super fun. I'm so grateful and glad to have colleagues like yourself, so I don't feel
Yeah,
like a nut
it
job.
is. It's great. Yeah, we've got to
Uh,
band together. We've got to come together.
yeah,
Everybody, we've got to come together and,
yeah. Well,
this
we're
is not
really
an
helping people, right? That otherwise
totally,
couldn't be helped. So that's where
exactly.
all that effort and love, it really pays off. It really feels good.
Does. Yeah, it's fantastic. So thank
Uh,
you.
that's
Thanks for the
great. Thank
opportunity to
you.
chat and to share. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I can't wait till the next one.
yay. Neither can I. I love it. Love these
So
times.
Marcus,
So thank you.
where can they find you? We'll put a link below where they can take the activator healer, supercharge class. But other
Totally.
than
You
that, where
can
else
take
can
the
they find
class.
you?
Yeah, Heart of the Matrix is probably the best place to connect in.
All right.
And we run live events and, free stuff there all the time around meditations and channelings and all sorts of good things to help you to integrate some of these things and to, step into, your beautiful, biggest, most amazing version, whatever you want to call it. So Heart of the Matrix on Facebook
Yeah,
is the
it's
place.
great. Yeah, it's a great place.
Yay.
There's so much there. And even for
Yeah,
newbies, just to get their feet wet and understanding,
that's
geometry,
great.
understanding,
Totally,
yeah,
totally. Yeah, if
yeah.
you want to just start, down this path and then there's a pathway to deepen it more in our circle group. Like you've got a circle group where we just talk about everything and anything and go down these deep pathways and which we otherwise might not be able to in certain environments. So
Right.
yeah, so we have that opportunity as well. But yeah, Heart of the Matrix is a good place to start.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Thank you so
Beautiful.
much,
Thank you.
Marcus. Love
Thanks, Karen.
speaking with you.
Yay.
Until
Likewise.
next
See you
time.
soon.
Bye. And thanks everyone for listening in to Dimensional Deep Dive with me and Marcus Bird as part of Light Warrior Radio. Until next time, lots of love, everyone. Bye.